Regarding Men, episode 46, The Joker is No Joke. And this is a spoiler alert. We're going to be talking about some of the plot twists in here, so if you don't want to hear anything about the movie, you might want to go watch the movie first and come back and watch this later.
Okay, well, here we are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Regarding Men. I'm Janice Fiamingo. I am the creator of the Fiamingo File, and I'm here with the terrific, the true-hearted, and the truth-telling Tom Golden, who is the author of Men Are Good. I am also here with the prolific, the principled, and the sometimes pugnacious Paul Elam.
I'm glad I got equal time on the alliterations.
Yes, yeah, I made sure I had 3 for each.
Ooh, the P's, so I was waiting for the next one.
And Paul, of course, is the creator of A Voice for Men and An Ear for Men, and he wants to briefly mention that he's got a new website up and running, and we've looked at it, and it is beautiful.
New website indeed. Thank you, Janice. I waited sort of for years. We had a suspicion that a feminist had acquired my first and last name as a domain shortly after the Radfem Hub affair on A Voice for Men, and we thought it was Vliet Tiptree. We had reason to believe it was her, aka Pamela O'Shaughnessy, erstwhile novelist for Simon & Schuster, bought my domain name, kept it for years, and put up bad press about me on it. Apparently she got not the attention she was looking for and got tired of it and let the domain go. So I got it. I put up paulelam.com, and what this site is, it is not designed to be a heavy traffic site. What it's designed for is to bring men in and put a lot of red pill philosophy right at their fingertips from the time they hit the home page to the time they leave. Give it a try. There'll be a link below. I think you guys will like it. I'm really proud of it. I think it's a good site. And I'm looking forward to, if you need a place to send it, if you see somebody that's been wandering around in a daze after seeing the Red Pill movie, send them to paulelam.com. That's the next natural place to follow up, and they'll get more of what they got out of the movie.
Fantastic.
Okie doke.
Okay, all right. Well, so today we are discussing the movie Joker. And I guess we're going to talk a little bit about the response that the film has generated and what we think the film means for red pill men and women. And so I won't go into a long, detailed discussion of it. I think probably most people have seen it or at least know what it's about. It's a prequel, I think is the correct term, to the Batman movies. And so it tells us how Joker came to be Joker. In this case, the story is that Joker became Joker because of the abuse that he suffered from a really ugly and cruel society. He is Arthur Phelps. We learn quite late in the film that he suffered horrific physical violence by his mother's boyfriend or boyfriends. It isn't exactly clear. He is a very sad fellow. He has no friends. He has a very nervous laugh, or it seems even a condition in which he laughs uncontrollably when he's uncomfortable. As a result, most people avoid him. As he himself says at one point, that he's the sort of person that people look away from. And in a way, the film is about those people whose suffering causes others to look away from them. He works as a clown. He aspires to be a stand-up comic, but we know that's doomed to fail. He's beaten twice in the movie. His co-workers and boss treat him terribly. And the whole film is set against a backdrop of impoverished, class-divided New York City. There are ongoing strikes. There are apparently rats everywhere. There's a sort of big businessman type guy, Thomas Wayne, who's running for mayor, promising to bring jobs to the city. There's a lot of bleakness in the film, people living in sort of tenement dwellings. And as we know, of course, what happens is that Arthur Fleck turns to violence and finds himself the symbolic leader of a movement of similarly angry, lonely, despairing, disaffected men. And that's how the movie ends. So, yeah, and it's a incredibly, I think almost anybody would agree, powerfully, Joaquin Phoenix plays Arthur, gives an incredible, riveting performance. It's the kind of film you're by turns made incredibly uncomfortable. Stop that. You can't mute me when I'm giving the lead in. Maybe I should turn it over. I got two cats fighting in the background here, having their morning tussle. So, stop that. This is really bad. You can't tell cats to stop it either.
No, you can't.
They don't
Doesn't
listen.
do any good. They're pulling the whole house down. So yeah, it's by turns intensely uncomfortable making, and also just riveting and powerful, beautiful. It has an incredible score that keeps you on the edge of your seat, and despite all that, it was very much disliked by most mainstream reviewers who said it was
why.
I wonder why, who said it was a great disappointment. Well, we weren't disappointed at all. So so let's talk about it a little bit.
Movie the year I thought it was absolutely awesome. There's so many incredible points. I don't want to forget any more that I'm already prone to. One of the things I wanted to point out, I thought that they set him up showing this disorder that he has, that he laughs inappropriately, and Phoenix pulls this off brilliantly. You can see the separation of affect, this dead laughter, that it's hysterical and dead at the same time. And on the other side of that, you have this absolutely flat affect, no emotional experience whatsoever. And I thought, how appropriate that is for the lives of men, that this is what we are expected to do. We feel pain and we show a laughing face to the world. And I thought that was intentional. That was certainly letting us know. Now, the makers of this may have wanted to make more of a statement about mental illness, and they surely did make the statement about mental illness through the movie several times. But it also struck me as perfectly appropriate for the issues that we talk about in men.
Yes.
This guy's seeing a counselor, trying to get him to express himself, and when he expresses himself, they don't like what he has to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds familiar to me as an MRA.
Indeed.
Brilliant performance. I thought at one point, one of the things that almost disappointed me about the movie was that they show him for a period in a brief fling with his neighbor. And I thought, God, this is just ruining the movie, because there's no way this unemployed bum, and even his body, the way they showed his body, and it is contorted and twisted and painful all the way through it. And there's like no way this guy is hooking up with this beautiful woman down the hall, and that's not happening. And it turned out it wasn't.
Right.
It was all in his mind.
Right.
He had to fabricate emotional support.
Yeah.
And to fantasize about it in order to have it.
And what else did he fantasize about? Remember the scene with Murray and Arthur, where it was his fantasy of being on his show, and Murray holds him and says, "You're the son I always wanted."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what he wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to have this masculine affirmation of his being, and he never got that. And so that's what he fantasizes about over and over again. Because, man, when you remove the masculine, you get chaos. And that, to me, was what the movie was about, was when you remove the masculine, you get chaos. You're going to get it one way or the other, and they got it.
Yeah.
And they set him up that way, showing that he believed a father who had abandoned him. It turned
Yes.
out that it was really just a figment of the crazy mother's imagination,
Right.
that she had ever been with the guy. And this confusion and this lack of identity was at the core of his problems, mental health wise. And the rage from that, eventually, Tom said, when you remove the masculine, you get chaos. Yeah, you get rage too.
Yes. Yes.
It's invariably going to come up in men who have been robbed of masculinity in their lives. They're angry. I've noticed that in a lot of millennials. Despite the highest standard of living in human history, there is a lot of constant angst and anger about their place in the world.
The fatherlessness.
And that is an artifact of a fatherless generation. And I've said this many times too. It isn't even whether or not individual men had fathers. I know millennials whose fathers were in the home, but they were a part of the values of a generation that was mostly fatherless. What they got from their peers was the values of a fatherless group. And you see that acted out now. It's absolutely amazing. And whether they were intending to or not with the Joker, I think they were making a statement. I think those riots in the streets was a fatherless generation, just like we see in Antifa right now. A bunch of fatherless young men angry at the world, looking to lash at anybody. We're not that far. It's probably why some of the critics hated this. We're not that far from that scenario. As a matter of fact, if you look at news footage of Antifa protests and stuff like that, and look at the movie, there's some stark similarities there.
Absolutely.
Angry young men.
Yep. We've never been blessed.
My sense of why so many critics didn't like this movie, because in many ways it seemed to me that, like, even 10 years ago, it might have been a movie that a lot of critics, and I'm thinking of critics as mainly, upper middle class sorts, pundits in our society who see themselves as the leaders and the arbiters of good taste and where one's sympathies should lie and all those kinds of things. I think that those people might have liked this film even 10 years ago, because in many ways it is kind of an unobjectionable portrayal of a marginalized young man and many other marginalized young people, mostly male. We don't know if every face behind those Joker masks in the final scenes is male, but we suspect. Badly treated. Sorry, I think I lost my connection there for a
second.
You said we suspect.
You're talking about the faces behind the mask.
Yeah, we suspect that those faces behind the mask are all male. We don't know that for sure, but this is about the disenfranchised, which is a kind of I would think sympathy provoking sort of portrayal for our elite, who are always talking about the marginalized and why we need to be concerned about people who have been left out. This is about a person who seems to have had he had the desire, as his mother always told him, to bring joy to people, yet he's never felt happy for one day, and he is turned bad. This is sort of the standard narrative of how evil comes into the world. He wasn't born evil. He was made bad because he felt he had no other way of being a part of his society except to try to destroy it. And I would have thought that, a lot of reviewers would have said this is a very compelling portrait of the dispossessed.
Except that he's white and male.
Exactly.
Precisely.
I think tells us where our society has come in a relatively short time.
Yes.
That we absolutely can't. We love that narrative if it's about anybody but a white man, and we absolutely hate it when it's about a white man, because we have become so determined that white men only act out of privilege. They cannot be victims of society. They are the victimizers. And if this movie had been about somebody who was not a white man, who had had those kinds of experiences, there is no way it would have received the response that it has received. I mean, I read reviews that outright said, not in these words, but very clearly, there is no white man who could have had all these bad experiences. This is a caricature, of a white man's disenchantment. This
Really?
is a fantasy. Yeah, essentially, this is a fantasy of what white men think they are experiencing, but we know they're really not.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
It's not my world.
So this is simply an invitation to violence
and they regarded it as such too. There was a lot of concern that that just, there's a whole legions of white men out there that are just one scratch away from going postal on the world, and if they see this movie, they might act out and shoot up the theater. That was, this is the hyperbole that was surrounding the release of this movie from the left.
Yeah.
All it was it. I think a brilliant and poignant expression that abuse, neglect doesn't have a gender or a race, and the left can't handle that.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the thing about the film too. It doesn't blame, it is not an anti-feminist film. It's not a right-wing film. It's not a white supremacist film. It's not interested actually in any of the categories that obsessively preoccupy, most of our arbiters of political correctness. It's not interested in race at all, really, I don't think. Not, with the very fact that all those men at the end are wearing masks. I think I saw some black faces. It isn't about race. It's not it is about gender to a large extent, because it's about a lot of the issues that men face, but it's not anti-feminist. The guy has bad experiences with women, and one can't help but notice that there are a number of single mothers in the film. He has that paradigmatic experience on the bus where he's, sitting behind a woman with her son. She's a black woman with a little boy. He's probably, 2 or so, maybe even less. I can never tell ages of kids. And, the Arthur character is making the little boy laugh. And it's one of the moments where you see the good heart that he has, and that genuine desire to bring joy to people. And the child does laugh. The child is delighted. And so for a few seconds there's this wonderful moment of connection. The mother notices and just immediately says, I forget what, quit harassing my boy, or, quit bothering my child.
Yeah.
He starts laughing uncontrollably. She becomes more agitated and angry. Eventually he hands her the little card that explains that his laughter is a disorder. It's not an intentional rebuke of her or mockery of her or anything. She sort of calms down. But, that's his experience of the world, where everybody, both his people he works with who know him and complete strangers, regard him as a creep. As a potential,
it isn't that a familiar meme?
Yeah, exactly. And, as a potential threat to children or to anyone. And that woman's cruelty, like, she's not blamed per se. She's got her own problems, one assumes. And that's the vision of the film, that many people are not kind to Arthur. And yet we understand why they're not kind, because they're living in their own, private misery, right, too. The woman down the hall who, she's certainly no angel. There's that opening scene when they're on the elevator together, and her lovely little daughter is prattling away about something, and she mimics taking a gun and pointing it at her head and blowing her head off. I'm not quite sure what that was supposed to mean, but one might assume that she's just so tired of listening to her daughter speak, that she wants to kill herself. It's not exactly the ideal mother's response to her little daughter's conversations.
There were no Mothers of the Year anywhere.
No, yeah. Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that really bothers the critics as well. Although I would say that the movie is actually somewhat sympathetic to, to all these failed people, these failed mothers. Certainly to Arthur's own mother, who is to a large extent, of course, responsible for his mental illness and for who he is, because she failed to protect him in the way that she should have done. But at the same time, I mean, we're horrified by her and disgusted by her for that failure, but also sympathetic because it seems as if she herself was an abuse victim in some way, is also suffering from mental illness, and is therefore not, I mean, we don't know to what extent she's morally responsible for what she did to her child. So it's very complex in that way. There, it's not, it's not applying a cookie cutter theory to the portrait of misery that it presents. Yes. But the very fact that it does present a white man as absolutely miserable, not in any way entitled or privileged, I think just enrages the vast majority of critics.
Yes.
I think that if feminists were actually more creative thinkers than they are, there was enough ambiguity in the narrative of this movie that they could have painted patriarchy as the culprit. There was a sort of a nod toward capitalism,
yes,
being a part of the problem, which should have been appealing to Marxists.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. And to me, if they were more thoughtful, if they had maybe a little more brains, they could have come up with an interpretation of this movie that justified very high ratings and praise as an instrument of looking at the evils of how toxic masculinity is created by male status and capitalism. They didn't even try. Quite disappointing, actually. Because there could have been a great back and forth about the analysis of the movie if they hadn't just seen a white guy and freaked out, which is what they did. Oh, no, white victim, can't have it. Story.
Yeah, I agree. Because at times I thought, this is a, this is a kind of movie about the 99% and the 1%. This is a movie about the class divide.
Yes,
in society and how that alienates a huge group of people. This is about, there's a scene where Arthur is just sitting in his apartment. I think his mother has gone to bed and he's sitting there and he can hear the sounds of people in other apartments, a TV going, I think, maybe a child crying. I can't remember exactly what. It's just this few seconds stark moment, and you think, he's not the only one. There's a whole bunch of other people, some older than he is, in different situations, also sitting alone in apartments, feeling miserable and living lives where there's very little joy and very little hope. And so that's a very poignant evocation of the loneliness that somehow in these are big cities that we have created. You could use the Marxist language. We've turned people into commodities. We've separated them from community. We've separated them from a strong sense of identity. And the film asks, how can we repair that? Is it possible? One of the things that I think would enrage critics looking for a kind of leftist narrative is that it's clear that more sort of government involvement in the lives of citizens is probably not going to be the answer. I mean, he has that therapist, presumably, a government worker that he meets with regularly. I don't know how often. And she's just no good. But even she's not presented as a villain either, particularly. She's utterly useless to him as a therapist. He says to her at one point, you keep asking me the same questions over and over again, and I give you answers, and then you just ask me the same questions the next time. It's clear she's not really interested in him. She's not engaging with him. She's not even listening to what he says in response to her questions. But, you look around, she's in a really ugly office. She's got papers, full file folders piled, feet high on her desk and everywhere else. She's probably got a caseload of people with similar problems to Arthur's, a mile long. And so it's impossible for her humanly to individually care for each of the people that she has to deal with. So it's not her fault either. It's just one of those, interesting situations where it seems that, the film asks questions about how an Arthur can be helped. And there is no easy answer. That's pretty clear.
It's true. And I thought the movie did a really good job of gradually building you up with all the misfortunes this guy had gone through and all of the trauma that he'd gone through. And at the same time, building you up with all the people who didn't listen. It was like, it just, you couldn't miss it. It was just, to me, that's the most important piece, was that men's pain, and of course, white men's pain is even worse, but men's pain is taboo. Nobody wants to hear that crap. The therapist certainly didn't want to hear it, and nobody wanted to hear it, and that's when someone is that unfortunately abused and traumatized and not given any kind of compassion whatsoever. This is what he said at the end. This is what you deserve. This is what you're going to get.
And there's another aspect of that relationship too with the counselor, that they served up on the Marxist platter for them because they cut the funding. Even that little office that she had, seeing too many people able to care for any of them adequately, they were even taking that away. And she pointed to the higher ups, e.g. the patriarchy or the capitalist elite. They're taking this away because, and the only time she had any affect at all, any sense of emotional presence, was telling him they don't give a shit about you or me. And there was an opportunity right there for any self-respecting Marxist to make an argument for what the message of this movie was. But again, they were so freaked out that we have a sympathetic white male victim. They just can't get near it. It just absolutely...
Yeah, it put them into quite a double bind, didn't it?
Listen, what do we do? I feel bad for. Oh wait, he's white.
Yeah, I think the film it really indicts everybody.
Yes.
In the sense that every person who has ever brushed off somebody suffering, who's ever not had time to listen, and that is every one of us, especially every one of us who's ever been mean to somebody or mocked somebody because they're socially awkward or weird, who's ever made them feel even worse for whatever mannerisms they have that set them apart from others and make them unattractive to people. And everybody's done that. We're all implicated.
Yes.
And but I agree, the fact that this is a white guy suffering this, and that his violence is presented as justifiable to that extent. I don't think it's glamorized in any way. A lot of people said that this was an invitation, but
it is justified.
But it is presented as justified, and they just can't stand that. It really, to me, illustrates the degree to which we have now created, at least amongst elites, a culture in which it is impossible to feel any empathy at all for a white man.
Right. And the more you believe that, the more you'll hate this movie.
Yeah. I think it needs to be said too. There's one pivotal scene in the movie where he's on Murray, I forget the guy's last name, talk show, where he comes with the gun, and the tension building up to that moment is just staggering. I was literally not breathing for a few seconds before he produces the gun and shoots the guy. But he says, what happens when you take a mentally ill man and and that in a society that ignores his problems?
Right.
And then he answered his question.
This is what you get.
This is what you get. And he was saying, this is what you deserve.
I think he said that, actually.
Yeah.
I think he said, this is what you deserve.
Yeah. And even if he didn't, it was strongly implied. But I think you're right. I think he he did say it.
Yeah.
But that was the message, that this is what society deserves. Now, you know, I've had plenty of moments where I look at the suffering of men, and not just one race, but all of them. What happens
Yes.
to men in this culture? And it
Yeah.
staggers me that we don't have more jokers. I'm just totally blown away.
Paul, I had the same impression. It's like, where are they? You know, how could it be that after all of this bullshit, there's not more jokers out there?
The fears of the left about what this movie would cause, I think, is a reflection of their understanding of just how screwed up this stuff is. That they know that if men acted in proportional response to what was done to them, we would have problems you wouldn't even want to talk about. It would be horrible.
Yeah.
And I think that the panning of the movie by critics on the left probably recognize that. They see a threat in that, and I think they know.
Right. They couldn't
As a
tolerate seeing their
society,
own
we ought to
bigotry.
be afraid of what we're doing to the disenfranchised.
They couldn't tolerate seeing their own bigotry.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what drove these bad reviews. I think you and Janice are both right about that.
Yeah. It's
For what it's worth, folks, 5 stars. It's an amazing
Oh,
film.
man.
yeah.
Absolutely
it sure is.
amazing.
If you want to go to a movie that's gripping and powerful, go see this one.
Yep.
Mhm.
It will
Yeah.
grab
Yeah.
And you know, and the response of ordinary people going to see it, I think, just proves that there is a recognition out there that you know, that the film's portrayal of despair and anger and disillusion is absolutely accurate. This is not a caricature. It's not an insane, fantastical exaggeration. That it's tapping into something that's very real because people feel it. And I think that's part of the reason why the critics were so enraged, because I mean, they have this crazy idea that as long as you do not allow the group that you've been hating on and mistreating and abusing so badly, as long as you don't allow them ever to articulate their experience or to see it represented in any way that affirms the reality of the experience, that somehow is going to make it not real,
Right.
that will repress the natural anger and alienation of people forever. But it doesn't.
Yes.
Well, you know, we found that out without a doubt in the late 1960s. I remember watching Watts and Detroit burn on TV, because we denied that voice to a class of people, and eventually it erupted into Joker-like violence on a large scale.
Yeah, you know, the whole thing reminds me of my workshops I used to give at universities sometimes, 90s or so, about how we need to treat men differently when they're in pain. And this pissed off a small percentage, the feminists basically, pissed them off so bad, because how could you possibly treat this group of people in a special way? You know, these people are the Nazis. You can't do anything for them. I think that's what we're seeing here. You know, something similar.
Yeah. Now,
unfortunately, it's not 2%. It's a lot more than that.
It's a lot more than that now, 25 years on from when you were sounding the alarm.
Yeah.
So, so great film. I guess we should
we
wind it up.
Put up something at the beginning of this, a graphic that says spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
I'm going to do that in the introduction.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
When I say the name of the thing, I'll say, you know, and some of the stuff is, we talk about some of the ending. So
yeah. I mean, I think most people know how it turns out. It is a prequel after all. So,
it turns out like an episode of Regarding Men. Not very happy.
Not very happy at the end.
Oh no, we're all smiling now. So what the hell?
It was an amazing movie. Definitely worth seeing, even if you know how it ends.
If you want to see something powerful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. Good. So we'll see you next week. Oh, no PUTA, no humanitarian?
Well, I think Todd Phillips deserves the humanitarian award for a really incredible script, incredible directing, incredible conception.
Yeah.
And
Good.
let's give the puta to all the critics who panned the movie because they couldn't stand seeing a sympathetic white guy.
Yeah.
We'll give them the Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, give them the rotten puta.
Rotten Tomato Puda. All right.
Okay.
That's good.
Thanks for all your support, guys. See you next time.
Indeed. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.